Thursday, May 1st, 2003, 30 miles off the coast of San Diego, 13:30 hours Pacific Daylight Time. Riding in the backseat of a Lockheed S-3 Viking piloted by Commander John Lucier, President George W. Bush touches down on the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln. He spends 30 minutes or so glad-handing with the members of the ship's crew, retires to the Admiral's wardroom to change out of his flight suit and into a regular suit, and emerges back on the flight deck at 1500 hours Pacific Time, 1800 hours Eastern Time, to deliver the speech that would become the most infamous unforced error of his entire two-term presidency. With the possible exception of that time he nearly assassinated himself with a tortilla chip while watching a college football game. For it was on that day, May Day 2003, that President Bush 43 delivered the dreaded Mission Accomplished speech, wherein he proclaimed that major combat operations in Iraq were at an end. It was a claim that was naively optimistic but not remotely true, since we were still over 2 years away from the heaviest combat of the war, which happened during the Battle of Fallujah in 2005, and combat operations were to continue right up until 2011, 30 months after Bush had left office. Later, during the summer and fall of 2003, when it had become abundantly clear that major combat operations were still ongoing and showed no signs of abating at any point in the near future, the Bush administration staffers and PR flacks attempted to blame the crew of the Abraham Lincoln for the existence of the famous Mission Accomplished banner that loomed above the president's right shoulder during the speech. Now, that wasn't us. That was all the Navy. They said they wanted a Mission Accomplished banner, but they didn't have the facilities for making one on board the ship, so we had it made at their request and brought it with us on the day of the speech. And even if that excuse were true, which I tend to doubt very much, it was kind of a dick move to blame the whole thing on the officers and sailors of the Abraham Lincoln, particularly since the White House camera operator and the official White House photographer made extra sure that the banner was prominently in the frame while the president was speaking. Now, you might be asking yourself, why am I dredging up this botched PR stunt from 18 years ago on today of all days? Well, I think it's pretty clear that the current administration, the Geritol Joe Biden administration, botched our withdrawal from Afghanistan, leaving tens of thousands of Americans held hostage to the Taliban, handing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons and equipment over to Islamic terrorist barbarians, creating the worst U.S. foreign policy disaster of at least the last 100 years, because Joe wanted to have his own Mission Accomplished party. Now, as you are probably aware, President Donald Trump negotiated an agreement last year with the Taliban whereby we extracted concessions from them. Don't overrun the country, don't harm any Americans, no reprisals against the Afghans who worked with us, cut all your ties with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and make your compliance subject to our oversight. And in return, we would exfiltrate all of our troops and civilians before the end of May this year. And Trump wanted to make extra sure that these conditions were taken seriously, so, as he said last week, he personally spoke to the leader of the Taliban and said to him in no uncertain terms, as only Donald Trump can, that if you fail to live up to this agreement, if you harm one hair on the head of any American, then the deal is off, and we will waste no time in bombing your punk ass right back to the Stone Age, which is where the Taliban prefer to live anyway, I think, but I digress. The point being, when Donald Trump threatens people, those threats are taken extremely seriously. Remember when Kim Jong-un tried to rattle his saber at Trump and said, "I've got a red button on my desk and don't believe I won't press it," and Trump fired back with, "Hey, little rocket man, go for it. See how that works out for you. Because I got a red button that's a hell of a lot bigger than yours, and my button actually works." And did we hear another belligerent word out of Little Rocket Man for the remainder of Trump's term in office? No, we did not. Joe Biden wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but he didn't want to do it in a way wherein any of the credit could go to Trump. So during his very first week in office, he tears up that deal that Trump had negotiated, and by whose terms the Taliban had been abiding up to that point. And he announces a new withdrawal date of 31 August. Why? because Joe and his lackeys wanted him to be able to stand up, stride to the podium on the 20th anniversary of September 11th, and announce, "Mission accomplished. We have secured peace with honor in Afghanistan. Our troops and our civilians are safely home, and I, Joe Biden, not the bad orange man, am the sole author of this achievement. So now you can all stand in awe of my formidable foreign policy expertise while I soak up the accolades of the press and collect my Nobel Peace Prize." Granted, he probably wouldn't have included the bit with the aircraft carrier landing because, let's face it, Joe Biden would probably turn into dust when the aircraft hit the carrier deck. What the hell happened to the president? There's nothing here but a dusty suit. All that remains to be seen now is how many American lives wind up needlessly sacrificed on the altar of Joe Biden's personal hubris and his congenital refusal to see Donald Trump take credit for anything. And I'll tell you right now, it's going to be a number that is too big for any of us to bear. But will Joe Biden give a damn? I very much doubt it. Hit the music, Jim Eagle. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we never declare the mission accomplished until our enemies are all dead and their emasculated corpses are neatly mounted on spikes. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And let's talk about the power of images. Because it's true what they say about visuals being far more powerful than words. Sometimes one image tells a story to which no amount of bloviating could ever do justice, and certainly no amount of bloviating that a ruggedly handsome YouTuber can do in the space of one 20-minute video. And the picture I chose for tonight's thumbnail, which you probably have already seen, the one in which the Taliban, wearing stolen American uniforms, sporting stolen American tactical gear, toting stolen American weapons, mockingly reenact the raising of the U.S. flag atop Mount Suribachi during the Battle of Iwo Jima on 23 February 1945, I think it tells a powerful story. In fact, there's probably more than one story it tells. For that picture will be not only the defining image of the Joe Biden presidency, and make no mistake, it will be that, but history may well record that picture as marking the exact moment when the American century came to an end. If you're old enough to remember the turn of the last century, and God, it makes me feel old when I have to deliver disclaimers like that, you will remember the boatloads of TV documentaries that had titles like The American Century such and such, in which that reference is to the entirety of the 20th century, the years 1900 to 2000, and though we do like the convenience of nice round numbers, it was never accurate to say the American century began in 1900, because the United States was not a world power at the dawn of the 20th century. It didn't become a world power until the end of the First World War in 1919, 1920. The thing that made us a bona fide world power was the fact that we fully industrialized our economy and crossed the Atlantic and became the decisive factor in a major European conflagration. When President Woodrow Wilson was invited to Paris to participate in the Versailles Conference, that was the first time the great powers of the old world had treated the United States as their diplomatic equal. For we had already demonstrated that we were their equal on the battlefield, even though we were active combatants in that conflict for less than a year and a half. But even still, in the aftermath of the First War, though we had established our status as a legitimate world power, we were not yet a great power, at least not in the sense to which people living today have become accustomed. We had no colonial possessions of which to speak beyond those which we had acquired when we defeated Spain in the War of 1898 to 1900, a war which was fought mostly in our own backyard against a badly fading European empire that pretty much anyone could have defeated at that stage of the game. Well, maybe not Joe Biden, but you get the point. And we had the Hawaiian Islands, of course, but in terms of imperial dick-measuring contests, we still came up well short of Britain and France. So it's fair to say that if there is something called the American century, its starting point was about 100 years ago, in the aftermath of the First World War, though we didn't solidify our status as a great power, a superpower, until we crossed the Atlantic for a second time and liberated Europe from under the jackboot of German tyranny for a second time. But unlike in the First War, this time we were the ones supplying the lion's share of the manpower and the materiel. Moreover, we were also fighting a war across the Pacific Ocean as well as the Atlantic, and yes, the contributions of the British and the Australians and the New Zealanders in that theater should not be overlooked or dismissed, but in terms of sheer numbers, the defeat of the Japanese Empire was at least 90% an American enterprise. At the end of the Second War, we absorbed the administration of the areas that the Japanese had taken by conquest, and since the British had spent every bit of the human and fiduciary resources they had on fighting 2 world wars in the space of 30 years, the British Empire became a spent force that only existed notionally at best. They gave up India in 1947, and we took over the administration of most of their other possessions except for the ones in Africa. So the United States gains its status as a world power after the First World War, and it gains the status of a superpower after the Second War. But the Soviet Union is also a superpower now, because in the course of that conflict, they've pretty much annexed all of Eastern Europe, most of Central Europe. They have subsumed the economies of all those countries, and they are using their newfound wealth, or so the plan goes, to raise the red banner of communism across the entire European continent. Britain is a spent force, France is a spent force, Germany winds up being partitioned for 45 years, so nobody stands in the way of Soviet hegemony over the whole of the European continent except for the United States, which is why we still have military outposts in England and Germany and Italy and so forth. Meanwhile, the Chinese Civil War, which began with the withdrawal of the Japanese occupiers, ends in 1949 with the communists winning. And communism, being the cancerous beast that it is, the red banner starts being raised bit by bit over the Asian continent as well. And just as in Europe, no country possesses the resources and the moral authority and the manpower to stand in communism's way, except for the United States. So now we're fighting a 2-front Cold War, not unlike the 2-front hot war that we were fighting from 1941 to 45. Real war breaks out from time to time, Korea in 1950-53, Vietnam in 1964 to 72. But if the United States had done nothing, we could easily be sitting here today in the 3rd decade of the 21st century in a world where North America is the only outpost of liberal democracy in the world. And before you come at me with, but wait, the Soviet Union and its empire were unsustainable. It was destined to collapse in 1990, just like it did. Bear in mind that the Soviet collapse only happened because of the vision and the moral courage of President Ronald Wilson Reagan. The Republican Party wanted no part of Reagan as its nominee. He was the people's choice in 1976, but the GOP establishment successfully maneuvered to deny him the nomination. He was even more the people's choice in 1980, and the same GOP establishment did everything in its power to deny him the nomination again. But once he had secured it, then they ran John Anderson as an independent candidate who was approved by the never-Reaganers. That is to say, if it was up to the squishy neoliberal Republican old guard, neither Ronald Reagan nor Donald Trump would ever have been the Republican nominee, much less the president. And we would be sitting here today marking the 75th anniversary of the Cold War, instead of viewing it as an historical topic that ended 3 decades ago. And why did it end? Because Ronald Reagan believed in the idea of American greatness and in the capacity of the American people to achieve that greatness, while the mainstream media and the Democrat Party and large swaths of the Republican Party, though they will never admit it today, called him an unhinged warmonger who was leading the world down the path to nuclear annihilation. Reagan saw things for what they were. He saw a Soviet Union where they needed to co-opt the economies of all of Central and Eastern Europe just to maintain a strategic balance, while the average Soviet citizen didn't have a flushing toilet or reliable electricity and was lucky to eat meat once a week, while the United States had the economic capacity to spend them into oblivion in any arms race, while maintaining for its people the highest standard of living in the history of human civilization. Reagan's mind was never addled by the thinking of a career bureaucrat, so he was able to see simple truths at the 30,000-foot level, and that's a skill he shared in common with Donald Trump. Our current administration, on the other hand, is hidebound by bureaucratic thinking, always playing to the 24-hour fake news cycle. Or maybe we should call it the Twitter cycle now, since that's what it effectively is. In the images we have seen out of Afghanistan in the past 10 days, the comparisons with Saigon in 1975 make for an easy visual analog, but in reality, this is far, far worse than that was. In 1975, we still had 15 years of the Cold War to fight, and we wound up winning decisively. Rather than the United States of 1975, we are closer right now to being the Soviet Union of 1989, a flailing, fading empire run by senile old men who are woefully unqualified to lead anyone anywhere, who got their jobs based equal parts on seniority and corruption, whose botched exit from a long occupation of Afghanistan has exposed for all the world to see the cracks in their fake facade of administrative competence. We cannot credibly project power overseas anymore, irrespective of how fancy our weapons technology might be, because the people we have leading us are on record as hating our country and everything it stands for. How much moral authority can the United States expect to wield when its own president ran for office on a platform that said American democracy is a force for evil in the world rather than good? How much power can we credibly project when the people running our diplomatic apparatus reject out of hand the things that Abraham Lincoln famously referred to as the better angels of our nature, who are on record as saying the United States is irredeemably racist in its founding, that the principles laid out in the charters of our freedom have no practical purpose except to advance something called white supremacy. Because how does that diplomatic approach work exactly? We're evil and racist and haven't done a damn bit of good in the world, so you guys ought to follow our example? Because good luck with that, Joe. I think you're finding out for yourself, if you're lucid enough to even realize it, that when you run for the presidency on a platform of hating America and all the principles of its founding, you're not going to have much luck when you try to marshal America's moral authority overseas, because you yourself have done everything in your power to diminish that moral authority. And there are a couple other clueless, idiotic buffoons I want to mention tonight before we go. Did you see Crying Chuck Schumer's antics this past weekend? I seem to recall an old axiom in politics that says, never wear a funny hat, never be photographed eating food, and above all else, never dance in public. I guess Crying Chuck didn't get the memo, because on Saturday he became Rappin' Chuck, and on Sunday he became Dancin' Chuck. Which is really an outstanding look when you're on stage spitting rhymes with some hip-hop guy half your age, and then you're twerking backstage with former comedian turned Democrat Party waterboy Stephen Colbert, while 15,000 odd Americans are at risk of being publicly beheaded by the Taliban due to your president's crippling incompetence and elephantine ego. So well done, Rappin' Dancin' Chuck. You are a model of dignity and decorum and good taste. And you know what else? Donald Trump would never do some shit like that. But not to be outdone, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in the middle of the biggest American foreign policy debacle of at least the past century, decided it would be a good time for a $25,000 a plate fundraiser in Napa Valley. And some video clips managed to get out before they were quickly pulled down, which tells us, yeah, she knows damn well how bad this looks. But it looks exponentially worse when you've been forcing people to wear religious face coverings for going on 2 years now, when you're always lecturing the nation about diversity and inclusion, when your fancy schmancy fundraiser features 100% white unmasked attendees being dutifully serviced by 100% Latino wait staff with masks on. And they say our ruling class is out of touch. Oh, and the vice president has come out of hiding, in case you didn't hear, just long enough to flee the country. Remind me again, what's her name? Give me a second, I'll think of it. Oh, that's right. Vice President Black Mask Grim Reaper Ninja Lady, the Ugandan Headhunter, the California Cackler. She got more nicknames than Ali and Creed, been passed around more parties than a fat sack of weed. Call her wrong, call her right, but never forget that she ain't white. From Maine to Montana to Carolina, she's the only VP who's got a vagina, the one, the only, Kamele Hey Rise! As always, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for accompanying me on the amusement park thrill ride that is the precipitous decline of the American Republic. I will be back here with you Wednesday for further updates on the continuing rapid decline of Western civilization. Hopefully the public beheadings will not have begun by then. Let's all cross our fingers on that, and until then, get off my lawn.